In 1957, humanity achieved the impossible. We sent a living creature into orbit, but the spacecraft did not have a heat shield and it did not have a parachute. We strapped a stray dog to the top of a modified intercontinental ballistic missile, knowing perfectly well she was never coming home. For decades, the official Soviet story was that Laika, the first dog in space, lived peacefully in orbit for a week before eating poisoned food. That was a lie. The truth about what actually happened inside Sputnik 2 was hidden from the world until 2002, and it is a brutal reality of the early space race. To understand the history of spaceflight, you have to understand the panic of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had just shocked the world by putting Sputnik 1, a metal ball with a radio transmitter, into orbit. The United States was terrified, but Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev wanted more. He wanted a biological payload. He wanted to prove that life could survive in the vacuum of space, and he gave his engineers exactly 4 weeks to figure it out. Welcome to Space Facts. Let us look at the real story of Laika. Here is what matters about the selection process. The Soviet scientists did not use purebred lab animals. They went into the streets of Moscow and gathered stray dogs. The logic was brutal but effective. If a dog could survive the freezing, starving winters on the streets of Moscow, it was tough enough to survive the extreme stress of a rocket launch. They chose a small, even-tempered mutt named Laika. She was quiet, she did not fight with the other dogs, and she was small enough to fit inside a capsule the size of a washing machine. The training was psychological torture. To prepare the dogs for the tiny confines of the spacecraft, scientists placed them in progressively smaller cages for up to 20 days at a time. They strapped them into centrifuges to simulate the crushing G-forces of launch. Laika passed every test. The tragedy of Laika is entirely a product of politics. Khrushchev wanted the launch to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. The engineering team had 1 month to design, build, and launch a life support system from scratch. Because of this insane deadline, there was zero time to design a re-entry vehicle. They could not figure out how to bring a capsule safely back through the atmosphere without burning it up. So they didn't even try. Sputnik 2 was designed from day one as a suicide mission. The capsule was equipped with an oxygen generator, a fan for cooling, and a gelatinous food dispenser. The plan was to keep Laika alive for 7 days, at which point the final food ration would contain a lethal dose of poison to euthanize her painlessly before the oxygen ran out. You are watching Space Facts, where we break down the reality of space exploration. If you want the actual history of spaceflight without the propaganda, hit that subscribe button. Here's what matters next. Let us look at the launch day. On November 3, 1957, the rocket ignited. Telemetry data showed exactly what you would expect. Laika was terrified. As the rocket hammered through the atmosphere, her heart rate spiked to 240 beats per minute, 3 times her normal resting rate. Her breathing quadrupled. When the spacecraft finally achieved orbit and weightlessness kicked in, Laika eventually calmed. Her heart rate dropped, and she ate some of the gelatinous food. The Soviet propaganda machine immediately went to work. For a week, they broadcasted to the world that Laika was fine, that she was orbiting the Earth in perfect health, and that the Soviet Union was leading the way into the future. Eventually, they announced she had died peacefully in orbit as planned. That narrative held for 45 years. But in 2002, a scientist who worked on the Sputnik 2 mission finally revealed the unclassified truth. During the launch, a piece of thermal insulation tore loose from the capsule. The thermal control system was completely compromised. Once in orbit, the temperature inside the tiny, uninsulated cabin skyrocketed. It quickly passed 104 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 Celsius. Laika did not live for a week. She did not eat the poisoned food. She died of heat exhaustion and sheer panic within the first 5 to 7 hours of the flight. Her life ended in terror, strapped inside a boiling metal sphere. For the next 5 months, Sputnik 2 continued to orbit the Earth with her remains inside. It became a silent, high-speed coffin, circling the planet 2,570 times before finally falling back into the atmosphere and burning up in April 1958. Bottom line, Laika did not volunteer for her mission. Her sacrifice proved that a living organism could survive the initial shock of launch and the condition of weightlessness, paving the way for Yuri Gagarin and every human astronaut who followed. But she's a permanent, uncomfortable reminder of the ethical cost of human progress. We reached for the stars, and we paid for it with the life of a stray dog. If this piece of history changed how you view the early space race, hit that like button. Subscribe to Space Facts for more unvarnished space history.